They laughed when he came up the drive on a mule. Susanna heard it before she understood it. That bright ripple of amusement running down the row of guests on the gravel passed mouth to mouth like a dish too hot to hold. Her sister Lydia's laugh rose highest, a silver thing with a hook in it. Mrs. Cardew pressed a gloved hand to her lips and failed entirely to smother her delight. And there, at the foot of the long summer drive at Wicklow, under a sky bleached white with July heat, came the man the whole parish had dressed and waited and emptied the larder to receive, the betrothed, the Duke of Ashforth, the richest man in England, by every account that had ever reached their corner of Devon, astride a mule the colour of wet ash, dust to his knees, a hat that had survived a decade of weather and lost. "Oh, Susanna!" Lydia's whisper carried the way a whisper carries when it means to. "Oh, my dear, they have sent you a tinker." Susanna did not answer. Her hand had gone to the seam of her gown, and she made herself loosen the fingers there, one at a time. The lavender she had cut at dawn and crushed into the hall vases still clung to her wrists. She could smell it over the dust and the hot box hedge and the faint sweetness of cut hay drifting up from the home field. She had risen at 4 to see the floors waxed. The beeswax shine of the steps behind her was, at this moment, the most ridiculous thing she owned. The mule stopped of its own accord at the turning circle, planted its grey hooves, and declined to proceed. Larks needled the white sky. Somewhere a cicada soared and soared. The rider sat a moment, taking in the assembled finery, the hired footman, the borrowed plate winking on the trestle. The 12 best families of the neighbourhood arranged like a stand of foxgloves in their summer muslins. And then he swung down unhurried, and the dust rose off him in a soft brown cloud. "It cannot be him," her father said. Hale had gone the grey of old tallow. "Susanna, it cannot be." "No," murmured Mrs. Cardew, who had a son of her own and 3 years of grievance to repay. "One does rather hope not." The man led the mule the last 20 yards on foot, which somehow made it worse. A duke would have ridden to the very steps. A duke would have come in a coach with outriders and a crest on the door and a valet to receive his gloves. This man walked with a roll in his stride that spoke of more saddle than carpet, and behind him on a cob trailed a single wiry servant with a face like a walnut, and a leather satchel across his back. The laughter thinned as he came near enough to be looked at properly. He was young, younger than the dread word. Duke had let any of them imagine, and broad through the shoulder in a way his dreadful coat could not disguise. The seams strained when he moved, and the dust had not softened the breadth of him. His jaw was dark with 2 days' road. His eyes, when they lifted, were a startling cool grey, and they went, without hurry and without apology, straight along the row of laughing faces until they found Susanna and stopped. "Wicklow," he said. It was not a question. "You have found it." Her own voice surprised her, level as a ruled line. I had begun to doubt the milestones. He looked, briefly, at the trestle of plate, at the footman, at Lydia's open mouth, and something moved at the corner of his. Not quite a smile. "I see I am expected, you are." "Not," said Mr. Hale, finding his tongue at last and finding it shrill. "That is, sir, we expect a gentleman, a particular gentleman, and you will forgive an old man his bluntness, but you have come up my drive on a mule," the stranger supplied. "Her name is Mab. She is sounder than she looks, and she has a low opinion of carriages which I have come to share." Lydia laughed again, helplessly, and pressed her face into Mrs. Cardew's shoulder. Susanna felt the heat climb her throat, but it was not, she discovered, shame for herself. It was for the row of them, for the borrowed plate, and the hired men, and the 3 best families, who had come only to watch the Hales reach above their station and fall short. She stepped off the bottom stair onto the gravel before she had decided to, and the small stones bit warm through the thin soles of her slippers. You have ridden a long way, she said to him, on a hot day. Whoever you are, you will have water before you have an inquisition. Tom, this to the nearest footman, who was not Tom but would do, bring the jug from the side table, the plain one. The stranger turned the full grey weight of his regard on her. Close to, he smelled of horse and road dust, and faintly, beneath it, of something cleaner. Cedar, perhaps, or the inside of a good travelling case. His hands, when he drew off the appalling hat, were not a labourer's hands. Broad, yes, strong, but the nails were clean, and a thin band of pale gold sat on the smallest finger of his left hand, half hidden, scored with a device she could not read at that distance. You are kind, he said, to a tinker. I have not yet decided what you are. She took the jug from the footman and a glass, and poured, and the water caught the white light and shivered. But I have decided you are thirsty. That, at least, requires no introduction. He took the glass. Their fingers did not touch. He was careful of that, she noticed, careful as a man stepping round a held breath, and he drank, slowly, all of it, and when he had done, he looked at the empty glass as though it had told him something. Thank you, Miss Hale. Susanna Hale. She lifted her chin a fraction. And you are at the house of Mr. Gerald Hale, who has waited 3 months for the Duke of Ashforth, and got, this afternoon, a man on a mule who will not give his name. The walnut-faced servant, hanging back with the cob, made a small, strangled sound that might have been a cough. The stranger's grey eyes flicked to him, one flick, quelling, and the man became very interested in the cob's bridle. Ashforth, said the stranger, returning the glass to her hand, is precisely who I am. For a moment no one moved. A bee blundered through the box hedge. The cut-hay sweetness rolled up the field again, thick as syrup in the heat. Then Mrs. Cardew laughed. A real laugh now, full-throated, scandalized, and gleeful, and the dam broke a second time. Lydia clutched at her father's sleeve. The vicar's wife turned to her neighbour with her brows in her hairline. Even the hired footmen were grinning at the gravel. The Duke of Ashforth, Mr. Hale repeated, and his voice cracked down the middle of it. Sir. Duke. The Duke of Ashforth holds half of Wiltshire. The Duke of Ashforth refused the regent alone and was thanked for it. The Duke of Ashforth does not. He does not arrive at a man's door upon a mule, the stranger said again patiently. Mab, we have established her. You are an impostor, cried Lydia, delighted. Recovering her courage now, the whole field was laughing with her. You have heard the great name and come to gull a country family out of a dinner. Oh, it is too good. Papa, send for the constable. Lydia. Susanna did not raise her voice. She had learned, in 3 years of keeping a sinking house from the eyes of its neighbours, that a low word lands harder than a loud one. You will be quiet now, and to her own faint astonishment, Lydia was. The stranger had not moved through any of it. He stood in the wreck of his own announcement, with the dust settling on his ruined boots, and they were ruined, Susanna saw, but they had been very fine. The leather was the colour of dark honey, and cut close to a high arch, the boots of a man who had once cared a great deal what he stood up in. And he watched the laughing faces with an expression she could not name, not anger, not embarrassment. Something quieter and more attentive, the look of a man reading a ledger and finding the figures exactly as he had feared. His gaze came back to her last of all. You did not laugh, he said. I have a house behind me, she answered. That has been laughed at quite enough this season. I find I have lost the taste for it. Something shifted in his face then. A fracture, very small, quickly closed. He inclined his head, and the gesture was wrong for a tinker, and wrong for a swindler. It was the bow of a man who had bowed to no one in a long time, and had not forgotten how. Then I will trespass on your water no further, Miss Hale, and trouble your father indoors, where these good people need not be put to the labour of laughing in the sun. He glanced once at the assembled 12 families, and added, gently, with no edge at all that anyone could afterwards have sworn to. It is a great heat for so much mirth. I should hate for any of you to take harm of it. He turned for the steps. Behind him the laughter faltered, uncertain now what it had been laughing at. They got him into the morning room. Susanna, her father, the stranger, and the walnut-faced servant, who refused, with a stubbornness that was itself peculiar, to wait in the kitchen. The guests dispersed across the lawn in a buzzing knot, far too entertained to leave and far too well-bred to follow. Lydia hovered at the door until Susanna closed it in her face. The morning room was the coolest in the house and the most honest. Susanna kept the estate books there, at the little walnut desk under the window. She had not had time, this morning of all mornings, to put them out of sight, and the ledger lay open where she had left it at dawn, the columns running red in her own neat hand. She saw the stranger see it. She did not move to close it. There was a kind of relief almost in being caught. Sir, her father had recovered enough to be frightened in an orderly way. If you are who you say, and I mean no insult, none, but you will grant it is a great deal to swallow, then where is your carriage? Your people? A man does not leave 40,000 a year at home and ride into Devon on a, if you say, mule. Once more, Hale, I shall begin to think you have something against the animal. The stranger lowered himself into the wing chair by the cold hearth, and the chair, which had taken Mr. Hale's weight for 30 years, creaked in a new register. I left my carriage at Honiton. I left my people, most of them in Wiltshire. I came the last 40 miles as you see me because I wished to arrive as a man and not as an income. His grey eyes moved deliberately to the open ledger and its red ink, and then to Susanna. I find an income is generally received before the man can get a word in. And we are to take your word, said Mr. Hale. You are to take nothing. The stranger leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes, and for an instant, in the green underwater light off the lawn, he looked simply exhausted. A young man at the bottom of a long road, with 2 days of dust on him and 40 miles of mule. Send to Honiton. Send to my solicitors in town, Marsh and Critchley, Lincoln's Inn. Send to the Duke of anything you please who has dined at Ashforth, and ask him whether his host was a tall fellow with a poor opinion of carriages. The truth will keep until the post comes back. He opened his eyes again. It is not your believing me that I came to see, Mr. Hale. Then what? Said Susanna, before her father could. Did you come to see? He looked at her for a long moment. Out on the lawn a peacock, they had borrowed even the peacock, let out its rusty, foolish cry. You, he said, only you. Her father wanted him gone. That much was plain by supper, conducted thinly off the unborrowed plate, the great service having gone back to the Cardews, in a cart with the rest of the lie. Mr. Hale sat at the head of his own table and shook, very slightly, the way he shook these days over the rent book, and Susanna watched him work himself toward a decision and dread at the cost of every rode out of it. If he is a fraud, he said to her. Lo, when the stranger had excused himself to see his mule stabled, and the wiry servant had, followed at his heel like a second shadow. If he is a fraud, then we have housed him and fed him, and the whole parish has watched us do it, and we are the family that took in a vagabond and called him Duke. And if he is not a fraud, he stopped. He pressed the bridge of his nose. If he is not a fraud, Susanna, then I have promised you, my grandfather promised you, long before you were of an age to choose. To a man who came up my drive on a beast a miller would be ashamed of, in front of every soul whose good opinion we have left. There is no road here that does not end in ruin. There is one. She refilled his glass with the thin claret and set the jug down. We could behave decently to a tired traveller until the post comes back from Honiton, and let the truth do the work of deciding, decently. He laughed, without any sound in it. You sound like your grandmother. I take it for a compliment, whatever you meant by it. but she did not feel as level as she sounded. She had seen the boots, she had seen the ring, and the bow, and the careful way the man kept his hands to himself, as though touch were a thing he had learned to ration. She had seen, most of all, the look he gave the ledger, not greed, not pity, but a swift, practiced reckoning, the look of a man who could read a column of figures upside down across a room, and had. No tinker read a gentlewoman's accounts like that. No swindler, having read them and found the family on the edge of nothing, sat back in the wing chair and shut his eyes and let himself be tired. She found him in the stable yard after the house had gone quiet, when the heat had broken at last into a violet dusk, and the swifts were screaming, low over the roofs. He was rubbing the mule down himself, by the light of a single lantern hung on a nail, in his shirt sleeves with the cuffs turned back, and the lantern caught the long muscles of his forearm and the gold of the ring, and the dark honey of the boots set neatly against the wall where the straw was clean. He had not seen her. The walnut-faced servant had, and went still. "It is only me," she said, to the servant and to the man. "I have brought oats. We are poor, but the horses eat." The stranger straightened. In the lantern light, the grey of his eyes had gone nearly black. "You should not be in the yard at this hour, Miss Hale." "It is my yard." She tipped the oats into the manger, and the mule lipped at them, content. "And you should not be grooming your own beast at a house with 3 grooms if you are a duke. So we are each of us where we ought not to be, and may as well make conversation." The almost smile again there and gone. "Bramble does the grooming," he said, with a nod at the servant, "when I let him. Tonight I did not let him. Why not?" He was quiet a moment, his hand flat on the mule's grey shoulder. "Because it is the one honest thing I have done all day," he said, "and I had a sudden great need of one. She ought to have gone in then, a wiser woman, a woman with less at stake and more to lose, would have set down the oat scoop and gone in, but the lantern threw its small, warm island in the violet dark, and the straw smelled of summer and horse, and the swifts screamed overhead, and the man stood there in his shirt-sleeves, saying honest things to a stranger, as though he had not had a chance to in years. "They will write to Honiton in the morning," she said. "My father, to your solicitors, your dukes, your innkeeper. They will know within the week whether to throw you out or grovel. I know what they will find." He did not sound as though he took much pleasure in it. "Then tell me." She set the scoop on the half-door. "Not so, I may believe you. I find I have got past needing to, which is its own small alarm to me. But because I should like to know the man who has come, on whatever account, to marry me, before the parish decides who he is on my behalf. Why a mule? Why the dust and the awful hat? A man does not do that for an afternoon's diversion." He turned from the horse and looked at her fully, and the lantern was between them, and his face was half gold and half dark. "Because a great name walks into a room before the man wearing it," he said. "Because the last 3 women I was made known to looked at me and saw 40,000 a year, and a house in Wiltshire and a barouche, and I stood there inside all of it like a coat on a stand. Because a contract was made for me without my leave, to a girl I had never seen, in a county I had never ridden, and I found I could not sign my name to a stranger's idea of me." His voice had dropped, low and even, no contractions to it at all, the cadence of a man bred to rooms Susanna would never enter. "So I came as no one. I came as a man on a tired beast with the dust on him, to see what your house would do with someone it had nothing to gain from." A breath. "Now I have seen it," the peacock cried again, far off, foolish in the dusk, "and," she said when she could. He stepped round the lantern. He did not touch her. That careful rationing again. But he was close enough now that she could see the road weariness in him, and, under it, something that had woken. "And every soul in that drive laughed," he said quietly, "but one. I think you do not yet know what that is worth. Miss Hale, I find I do." Behind him, in the doorway of the tack-room, the walnut-faced servant had come forward with a folded paper held out, anxious, low. "Your Grace," he said, the words slipping out plain and unthinking in the half-dark. "Your Grace." The way a man says a thing he has said 10,000 times. "Your Grace, the letter for Marsh and Critchley, if you mean it to go with the Morning Post." The stranger went still. So did Susanna. The two words hung in the lantern light between the three of them. And the mule chewed on, indifferent, and somewhere over the violet roofs, the last swift cut its scream short, and she stood in her own stable yard, with the oat dust on her hands, and understood that she was very far now from any road that led back. The walnut-faced servant, Bramble, heard the words leave his own mouth and visibly wished them back. He stood with the folded letter still extended, the seal a dull red bead in the lantern light, and looked from his master's face to Susanna's and found no help in either. "Your Grace," he said again, more wretchedly, and then nothing at all. Susanna set the oat scoop down on the half-door with great care, as though it might shatter. The mule chewed. The last of the swifts had gone in, and the yard had filled with that thick blue stillness that comes after a hot day breaks, the cobbles still giving up their warmth through the thin soles of her slippers. "Well," she said, "there it is." "There it is," the Duke agreed. "You let my father shake at his own table tonight." She kept her voice low, because a low word landed harder, and because if she let it rise it might not stop. "You sat in his chair and watched him reckon whether he had ruined his daughters by housing a vagabond, and you let him reckon it. You watched the whole parish laugh, and you weighed us in it like apples on a scale." Yes, he did not flinch from the word. The lantern caught the line of his jaw, dark with road, and the cool grey of his eyes did not move off her. "I did precisely that, and found us wanting or not, by some sum only you were keeping." "I found you," he said, "not wanting. You may keep your verdict." Her hands had closed again at the seam of her gown. She made them open, finger by finger, the old discipline. "I am not a column of figures, Your Grace, to be totted up by candlelight and approved. My father is not a debt to be discharged by your condescension. We have been laughed at on our own gravel, by people who borrowed our courage along, with our plate, and you stood in the middle of it and let it run, to see what we were made of." Bramble took 2 silent steps backward into the dark of the tack-room. The Duke was quiet a moment. When he spoke, the even, room-bred cadence had gone rougher at the edge. "Every word of that is just," he said. "I have no defense to make of it that would not insult you further. I did weigh you. I have been weighed all my life and learned the trick of it, and I turned it on the first house that had nothing to gain by lying to me. And that was a cold thing to do, and you are right to name it." He drew a breath. "I will say only this, and then I will go in and let you alone. I did not come to Devon expecting to be glad I came. I am not in the habit of it." The peacock, nestling somewhere on the stable roof, gave one last rusty complaint and was still. "Send your letter," Susanna said. "Bramble, give it to Mary in the morning. She walks to the post. And you." She turned back to the man in his shirt-sleeves, with the gold ring catching the light. "You will be civil to my father at breakfast, and you will not test him further, because he has been tested enough by this last year to last him to the grave and back, and he is mine to protect, not yours to assay." "Agreed," said the Duke of Ashforth, and bowed. That wrong, right bow again, the bow of a man who had bowed to no one. And Susanna took up her skirts and went in before the trembling in her own knees could reach her voice. By 8 the next morning the parish knew. There is no telegraph in Devon faster than a footman with a tail, and the hired men had carried it home through the dusk. That the tinker on the mule had been called, "Your Grace," in the stable-yard by his own servant plain as a church bell, and that the Hales had housed a real live duke after all, and laughed in his face on their own drive. Susanna learned how far it had run when Mrs. Cardew's carriage. The Cardews owned a carriage, and never let the neighborhood forget the want of one elsewhere. Came up the drive. At an hour no morning call had any business keeping. My dear Susanna. Mrs. Cardew came across the hall with both hands out, the borrowed back plate evidently forgiven and forgotten, her morning silk the color of a ripe plum in the cool dimness. What a delicious misunderstanding. Of course, we all knew at once it could not be as it appeared, I said to Lydia. Did I not, Lydia? I said there is more here than a mule. You said, Susanna answered, that one did rather hope it was not him. I was standing beside you. The heat carries sound. Mrs. Cardew's smile held by main force. Behind her Lydia hovered, pink and wretched and unable to meet her sister's eye, twisting the fringe of her shawl through her fingers. A jest, Mrs. Cardew said, merely a jest in the warmth of the moment. Susanna, you were always too literal. Now, he breakfasts here, the Duke. Might one? He breakfasts, said Susanna, with my father in the small parlour, where there is room for two and no more. She crossed to the door and set her hand upon it. It was good of you to drive out so early, ma'am. In such heat, you will want to be home before the worst of it. Do give my regards to Mr. Cardew. It was, she thought, as the plum-coloured silk withdrew in a rustle of affront, a small enough revenge, and a poor one, and she ought to have been ashamed of the pleasure it gave her. She was not. The hall smelled of the lavender she had crushed into the vases the morning before, browning now at the edges, and of beeswax, and of the particular dusty heat of a house, with every window shut against the sun, and she stood in it a moment, with her hand still on the closed door, and let herself for one breath only feel how tired she was. He has asked for you, said Lydia from behind her. Susanna turned. Her sister had stayed. Lydia, who fled awkwardness the way a cat flees water, had stayed in the hall, white-faced, her chin doing the small brave wobble it had done since she was 6. Has he? Susanna, that I should have said. Tinker. Lydia's voice broke, before all of them, and he Duke. And you to marry him, and I have made you you have made us nothing we were not already. Susanna went to her and, because she was the elder, and because the house had only the two of them now to keep its courage up, she straightened the twisted fringe of Lydia's shawl with her own hands. He heard worse than you, and from richer mouths. Go and put cold water on your eyes. And Lydia. She caught her sister's wrist as she turned. Whatever he is, and whatever comes of it, you will not flatter him now to mend yesterday. I had rather you laughed at him twice over than fawned. Do you understand me? Lydia, hiccuping, nodded, and fled at last toward the stairs. He had asked for her. Susanna stood alone in the brown lavender dimness and discovered that the knowledge sat in her chest like a swallowed coal, warm and unwelcome and impossible to put down. She did not go to him at once. She went, instead, where the trouble was, because that had become her instinct over a hard year, toward the noise, not away from it. And the noise, that morning, was a carriage, a second carriage, and this one no neighbour's gig but a travelling chariot, dark green, mud to the axles, 4 horses blown and steaming in the yard, and a crest on the door that she did not need to read to know matched the half-hidden device on a certain gold ring. A man was handing himself down from it as she came round the corner of the house. He was tall and fair where the Duke was dark, and dressed with a town exactness that made the dust of the road upon him look like an insult he intended to repay someone for. He was beautiful, there was no other honest word. The cheekbones, the pale clear eyes, the mouth cut fine as a girl's, and the beauty had something wrong inside it, the way fruit can be perfect to the eye, and turned at the core. You, he said to her, not unkindly, in the voice of a man addressing an upper servant, will tell me where I may find the Duke of Ashforth. I am his cousin. I have driven from Wiltshire without proper sleep on a fool's errand, and I should like to discharge it and go home." "You will be Mr. Vane," said Susanna. That checked him. The pale eyes sharpened on her, the gown, the unpowdered hands, the keys at her waist, and recalculated. "I will, and you are. Susanna Hale, this is my father's house, and you are standing in his yard, shouting for his guest. If you will come indoors out of the sun, Mr. Vane, I will have you announced like a Christian, and you may discharge your errand in a chair with a glass in your hand, instead of over 4 exhausted horses, Joseph." To the stable boy, who had appeared gaping, "Walk those poor creatures before you water them. They are fit to drop." Mr. Crispin Vane looked at her for a long moment, and something cool and amused and entirely without warmth came into his face. "So you are the country heiress," he said softly. "I had pictured someone, sillier. Forgive me. I find I shall enjoy this more than I had hoped." He swept her a bow far smoother than his cousin's and far emptier, and gestured her ahead of him toward her own door with a grace that managed, somehow, to make it his. "After you, Miss Hale. By all means, let us go and announce me." The small parlour was not built for 4. The Duke had risen the instant the door opened. He had been at the window. Susanna saw the morning light grey and merciless on the road dust he had not yet had means to fully be rid of. And the look that crossed his face at the sight of his cousin was the first thing she had seen him fail to govern. Crispin, Gabriel. Mr. Vane strolled in as though he had built the room. "You look like something the carrier left in the rain." "Good heavens, is that the same coat?" "It is." "You wretched theatrical creature. The whole of Wiltshire is in an uproar. You vanish from Honiton. You send no word. Your mother is prostrate. Marsh writes me 3 letters in a hand like a hen's, and I find you here." The pale eyes travelled the small honest room, the worn carpet, the estate ledger. Susanna had still not put away playing the pauper in a parlour that wants reglazing. "To what end, dear coz?" "What is it this time? You were not sent for," the Duke said. "No, I came. There is a difference. And you have always been careless of it." Mr. Vane took, without invitation, the best chair and crossed one immaculate boot over the other. "Mr. Hale, Miss Hale, you must both be wondering, you have a right to wonder, what my cousin is about, and since he will not tell you, and since I have your interests nearer my heart than you can possibly credit, I shall." His smile widened. "Has he told you why he must marry Miss Hale? Why he must? Within the year, and to a bride of our late grandfather's choosing, and to no other." Crispin. There was a warning in the single word that Susanna had not heard the Duke use before, low and flat as a closed door. "Has he mentioned Mr. Vane went on pleasantly. "The codicil? No, I thought not. It is not a flattering thing to confess across a breakfast table that one has come, courting not from inclination but from arithmetic. Our grandfather, Miss Hale, was a man fond of binding the future to his will. He left the bulk of the Ashforth estate not to my cousin outright, but on a condition, that Gabriel honour the betrothal the old man arranged over his head, to one Miss Susanna Hale of Wicklow, Devon, and marry her before his next birthday. Should he refuse her, or she him, or should the year run out with the thing undone? Vane spread his fine pale hands. The greater part falls to the next heir. Which is to say, with all the regret in the world, to me, the room was very quiet. Out in the yard a horse stamped. A fly bumped the window pane, again and again, a small dull drum. Susanna did not look at the Duke. She found she could not. She looked at the ledger on the little walnut desk, the columns running red in her own hand, and felt the warm, swallowed coal in her chest turn over and go cold. "So you see," Mr. Vane said gently, into the silence, "it is not romance that has come up your drive on a mule, Miss Hale. It is a man saving 4/5 of his fortune from a cousin he cannot abide. The mule, the dust, the pretty test of your character in the stable yard. Bramble does talk, I am afraid, to the right shilling, All of it window dressing, to let him tell himself the bargain was free. It was never free. He must have you, or he is poorer by Wiltshire. I thought you had better hear it plainly than discover it on your wedding morning. Get out, said the Duke. In a moment. Mr. Vane did not stir. I have not yet, said the kind part. Miss Hale, I am not your enemy. I am very nearly your only friend in this. You are a sensible woman. One sees it in your hands. You do not wish to be married for a codicil, and I do not wish my cousin to be married at all. Our interests, you observe, run sweetly together. Refuse him. Send him home. I will see your father's debts cleared as a wedding present for the wedding that does not happen. Yes, I know about the debts, the whole county knows. It is in the very plaster of this house, and you will all be the better for it, and no one need marry anyone. He rose at last and brushed an invisible mote from his sleeve. Think on it. There is no haste. There is, in fact. He glanced at his cousin, and the rotten thing at the core of his beauty showed for one bright instant a great deal of time, until the birthday. Not a day more. He bowed to Susanna and to her father, who had not managed a single word through the whole of it, and let himself out, and they heard him in the hall calling for a glass of something cold as though the house were an inn, and he, the only paying, guest. Mr. Hale lowered himself into a chair, as though his legs had been cut from under him. Susanna, he said faintly, the debts. He knows about the debts. Everyone knows about the debts, Papa. He said so himself, but her own voice came from very far away. She made herself turn, then, to the Duke. He had not moved from the window. The grey light was hard on him, and he met her eyes and did not look away, and did not, she noticed. She noticed everything. It was her curse, reach for the easy comfort of denial. Is it true? She asked him. Papa, she said, before he could answer, go and see to Mr. Vane before he drinks the cellar dry. I will come to you directly. Her father went, glad to be sent, an old man grateful for an errand. The door clicked. The fly drummed at the glass. She and the Duke of Ashforth stood at opposite ends of a parlour built for two, with the ledger lying open and red between them. Is it true? She said again. The codicil. The birthday that you marry me or lose 4 parts of 5 to that. That beautiful man with the spoiled face. Do not weigh your answer. I have had enough this hour of being weighed. It is true, he said. The simplicity of it took the breath from her more cleanly than any flourish could have. She had braced for explanation, for the smooth machinery of a great man, making a small thing of his own advantage. She had not braced for. Yes. Bare and unguarded, set down on the table like a card he would not take back. Then he is right, she said. You came because you must. I came because I must. He took one step from the window and stopped himself, the old rationing of his own nearness. And I stayed, Miss Hale, for a reason that has nothing to do with my grandfather, and I will not insult you by pretending the two are one. The codicil brought me to Devon. It did not make you the only one who would not laugh. It did not pour me water in the sun before you knew whether I could pay for it. Crispin has told you the true half of a thing and called it the whole, which is the only kind of lie he has ever needed to tell. His jaw tightened. He has done it expertly. He always does. 40 miles on a mule, she said, to arrive as a man and not an income, and all the while the income is the very thing that sent you. You would lose Wiltshire without me. You did not mention that part, in the stable yard, when you told me what my not lawing was worth. No. A muscle moved in his cheek. I did not. I told myself I would tell you when I had earned the telling. That was vanity, and cowardice wearing vanity's coat, and Crispin has saved me from it, at the cost of every word I might have said being poisoned in advance. He is good at that. He has had practice on me since we were boys. He looked at her, and for the first time the cool grey eyes held something close to a plea, quickly leashed. Believe him about the codicil. It is true to the letter. Do not believe him about me. That is all I will ask, and I have no right to ask even that." "You have no right to ask anything," she agreed, and was distantly amazed at how steady the words came. "And I have no idea at this moment what I believe, except this." She crossed to the little desk and closed the ledger at last, the red columns folding away into worn brown leather. "I will not be a clause, Your Grace. I will not be the line your grandfather wrote, to keep Wiltshire out of your cousin's hands. I had rather see this house come down stone by stone, with the whole parish watching, than be married as a remedy, whatever else I am, and your cousin thinks me a sensible woman to be bought off with my father's debts. I am not a remedy." "I know it," he said, very low. "It is the first thing I knew about you. It is why I am still here." There was a sound at the door, not a knock, the door simply opening, Mr. Vane's untroubled face appearing round its edge with a glass of the thin claret in his hand, and the morning light gilding his ruined perfect smile. "Forgive me," he said, not sorry at all. "Only Gabriel, I forgot to mention, your mother does not come alone. She is a day behind me on the road, no more, and she brings company." The pale eyes slid to Susanna and warmed with a pleasure that had nothing kind anywhere within it. "Lady Honoria travels with her. You will remember Lady Honoria, 'cause everyone remembers Lady Honoria. She was so very nearly the bride our grandfather chose, before he changed his mind and chose Devon instead." He raised the glass an inch, a toast to no one. "I thought Miss Hale should like to be warned. One does so hate to be the last to know who else is in the running. Until tomorrow, then, do let someone find me a bed that does not want airing." He withdrew. The door clicked shut a second time, and Susanna stood with her hand still flat on the closed ledger, the lavender browning in the vases, the fly drumming and drumming at the hot glass, and understood that whatever road she had thought herself on the night before, it had just forked again beneath her feet, and that somewhere on the Honiton road, a day off and closing, came a woman who had been chosen first. A day off and closing. Susanna carried that knowledge up to the linen room as if it were a tray she might spill, and there she stayed past midnight, with a branch of candles, and the household's whole stock of decent sheets spread out before her, counting them against the beds she would shortly have to fill. There were not enough. There had not been enough of anything at Wicklow for 3 years, and she had grown clever at the arithmetic of not enough. Which guest got the goose down, and which the flock, which room could be made to look intended rather than merely opened. A duchess, and a lady who had nearly been a duchess, descending on a house that wanted reglazing, and she, with 11 good sheets and a sister, whose eyes were still pink from yesterday's weeping. The candle flames leaned in the draught the staff had learned to ignore. The one that came under the east door, no matter the season. Beeswax and old lavender, and the green night smell of the garden through the cracked sash. Somewhere below, a clock she could not afford to have mended kept its uneven time. She folded the 11th sheet into a hard white square and pressed the crease flat with the heel of her hand, and did not hear him until he spoke. "You should be abed, Miss Hale." She did not start. She had used up her capacity for being startled in the stable yard, she thought, with the words, "Your Grace," still hanging in the lantern light. The Duke stood in the doorway in his shirt-sleeves, a candle of his own cupped in one broad hand, and the small flame lit him from beneath and made a stranger of his road-dark face. "I have a house full of empty beds and a duchess on the road," she said. "One of us should be counting sheets, and it will not be the duchess." "No." Something that was almost the smile crossed him. "My mother has never in her life known how many sheets stood between her and disgrace. It is one of the great differences between us. I have always known to the linen exactly." It surprised a breath of laughter out of her, tired and unwilling. "Is that meant to recommend you?" "It is meant," he said, coming no nearer than the threshold, the old rationing of his own nearness, "to tell you the truth in a small matter. since I am forbidden the large ones until the post comes back from Honiton." He set his candle on the press by the door. The two flames did not quite reach each other across the dark room. "You have not slept. I find sleep a poor use of a night that has a great deal in it." She squared the stack of folded linen. "Your cousin drinks my father's cellar. Your mother is a day off. Lady Honoria," she made the name flat, "a coin laid on a counter, is a day off, and I am to be married for a clause or refuse for my pride, and either way the parish will have its fill of us by Sunday. I had rather count sheets than lie in the dark with that." He was quiet a moment. The draught worried the candle flames. The garden breathed its green breath through the sash. "11, he said. "What? You have folded 11? I watched you do the last 4. You have 11 good sheets, Miss Hale, and you are wondering how to make them into 14. He inclined his head toward the press, where the worn flock cases sat apart from the down. "Put my mother in the flock. She will complain, and it will give her something to do that is not looking at you, which will be a mercy to you both. Give the down to Lady Honoria. She will not notice it, but she will notice its absence, and there is no profit in handing that woman a grievance she has not earned." Susanna looked at him across the leaning candlelight. "You would have me coddle the lady you may yet marry instead of me. I would have you keep the high ground," he said, "which is the only ground I have ever seen you stand on, and which I should be sorry to watch you cede over bed linen." He picked up his candle again. 11 is enough, if you stop trying to make it 14. Most things are enough if one stops. Good night, Miss Hale. Leave the rest. The house will hold till morning. It has held longer than this on less." He went, and the dark closed over the place where he had stood, and Susanna sat a while longer, with the warm swallowed coal back in her chest, where she had so carefully set it down, and hated, with a clean and useless heat, how easy he made it to forget the clause. The chariot came at noon in the full white blaze of the day, 4 fresh horses sweating in their traces, and a crest on the door that no one this time mistook for anything but what it was. The whole household had been waiting since 10, scrubbed and stationed. Susanna had put Lydia in her best muslin, and her father in his good coat, and the hall in such order as 11 sheets and a year of want could contrive, and she stood on her own scoured steps in the heat, with the cicadas soaring, and watched a footman in livery, worth more than the carriage hand down the Dowager Duchess of Ashforth. She was a small woman, that was the first surprise. Susanna had built her tall out of dread, and the reality came down the carriage step, narrow and upright, and no higher than Lydia's shoulder, in travelling silk the colour of a thundercloud, with her son's grey eyes set in a face that had spent 60 years learning to give nothing away and had mastered it. She put up a glass. She looked at the house through it. The want of reglazing, the browning swag of greenery over the door that Susanna had hung at dawn, and now wished unhung, and she looked at Susanna, and lowered the glass without a word. Mamma. Gabriel had come out behind Susanna. She felt him at her shoulder, the heat of him before she heard him. "You have made good time." "I have made wretched time, on wretched roads, to a wretched part of the world, because my son chose to vanish from a respectable inn and send no word to a soul who loves him." The dowager's voice was dry and small and perfectly carrying. "You look, Gabriel, like a man who has been sleeping in ditches. I shall not ask. I have not the strength for the answer." Her eyes returned to Susanna, and travelled her, head to slipper, with an economy that left nothing out. "And this is the young person." "This is Miss Susanna Hale," Gabriel said, and there was iron under the courtesy, "in whose father's house you are standing, and to whom you will give a civil afternoon, if you give nothing else." "I am always civil," said the dowager. "Civility costs me nothing, which is why I can afford so much of it, Miss Hale." She inclined her head a precise half-inch. "You keep a tidy step. One notices the step. It tells one what the inside will be before the door is opened. Then you are already acquainted with my hall, ma'am, Susanna said, and need not trouble to admire it. Will you come in out of the sun? The heat is unkind to travellers, and you have come a long way to be unkind to me, and you will do it better cool than hot. For one instant something flickered behind the dowager's glass. Not warmth, nothing so generous, but a sharp old interest, the look of a duelist who has felt the button come off the other foil. Gabriel, she said, not turning, she has teeth. She has, her son agreed. How tiresome for you, said the dowager, and went up the steps, and behind her, last out of the carriage, and in no hurry, in palest primrose muslin that had not taken a particle of the road's dust, because the road's dust would not have dared, came Lady Honoria. She was, Susanna saw at once and with a sinking that she despised, exactly as beautiful as Crispin Vane had promised. Where Lydia's prettiness was a girl's, all bloom and weather, this was the finished article, dark hair dressed close, a throat like the stem of a glass, a face of such even loveliness that the eye slid over it, looking for the flaw, and found none. There was no rot at the core of this beauty, as there was in the cousins. That was the worst thing. This was simply a beautiful woman, composed and kind-eyed, coming up a poorhouse's steps with her hands held out. Miss Hale. Her voice was low and lovely and warm. I have so dreaded this, and I see now I need not have. Will you forgive me? I have been carried into the middle of your affairs like a parcel no one asked for, and I mean to be no trouble to you at all. You are welcome at Wicklow, Susanna said, because there was nothing else a woman could say, with her father trembling at her elbow and the parish watching, from behind every hedge in the county. You are generous. Lady Honoria's clasp was cool and brief. Her eyes went past Susanna's shoulder, then to the dark figure on the step, and changed. Softened, brightened, opened, the whole lovely face turning toward him like a thing toward the sun. Gabriel, she said, and the single word had 10 years in it. Oh, Gabriel, what have you done to yourself? Honoria, he bowed, the wrong right bow. But Susanna, who noticed everything, who could not help but notice, saw that to this woman he gave his eyes as well, and held them a beat longer than a stranger's, and that there passed between them in that beat a whole grammar of old acquaintance to which she did not have the key. I find I have a great deal to say to you, Lady Honoria said softly, when you are at leisure, and went up past him into the cool of the hall, leaving the scent of orris and warm primrose silk on the hot air behind her, and Susanna stood on her own scrubbed step in the noon glare, and understood that the contest she had not asked to enter had just walked through her, door in slippers that cost more than her quarter's rent. She did not have leisure to nurse it. There was a duchess to be fed. Dinner that evening was the worst meal Susanna had ever sat through under her own roof, and she had sat through some that ended in bailiffs. The good plate had gone back to the Cardews. They ate off the honest pewter, and the dowager affected not to see it, which was somehow louder than complaint. Crispin Vane talked. He talked beautifully with that fine, ruined mouth, drawing the dowager out and Lydia in and turning every harmless remark into a blade he tucked away, unused, just so the table should know he had it. Lady Honoria spoke little and listened well, her grave, kind eyes moving among them, resting oftenest on Gabriel, who sat at the foot of the borrowed back-bare table, and answered what he was asked, and offered nothing, and whose road-dark face gave away no more to Susanna now than it had given his mother on the steps. You must tell me of Devon, Miss Hale, Lady Honoria said when the cloth was drawn. I have never been so far west. It is very green. One feels the sea is near, though one cannot see it. 8 miles, Susanna said. You smell it when the wind comes round. By tomorrow, if the heat breaks, you will. How I should love to see it. She turned the stem of her glass in her long fingers. Gabriel used to say he would take me to the sea. Do you remember, Gabriel? That summer at Ashforth, before your grandfather." She stopped, with the prettiest confusion, and pressed 2 fingers to her lips. "Forgive me," I ran on. "It was all so very long ago, and nothing came of it, and I am being unpardonable at Miss Hale's table." Her eyes lifted to Susanna's, full of a soft distress that looked, Susanna was wretchedly certain, entirely real. "I am sorry. Truly, I should not have spoken of that summer." "You may speak of any summer you please," Susanna said. "I have no claim on Gabriel's summers." She heard herself use the name, Bear, for the first time, and did not call it back. "His past is his own. I am only the present inconvenience." Across the table, the dowager's glass came up. "What a remarkable thing to say," she observed to the room at large. "The present inconvenience. Do you know, I begin to see what the old man saw. He had a horror of dull women, my husband's father. He used to say a dull wife was a debt that compounded. He would have liked you, Miss Hale, which is more than he managed for most of his own blood." She set the glass down. "It is a pity. I had so hoped to dislike you straightforwardly. You are making it a labor. I shall try to be more disagreeable, ma'am, if it would ease you." "Do," said the dowager. "I should be obliged." And Crispin Vane, watching all of it with his pale, amused eyes, lifted his replenished glass an inch off the cloth and smiled at Susanna down the length of the table, like a man watching a horse he has wagered against run beautifully and uselessly toward a fence he knows is too high. She found out how high after the ladies withdrew. It was the heat that did it, or she would never have known. The drawing-room was airless. The day's warmth pooled and standing in it, though the sun had gone, and Susanna slipped out through the long window onto the terrace to breathe, and to be for one moment in no one's contest. The garden lay grey-green and enormous in the last of the light. The cut hay smell had gone over to dew and stock, and the cool exhalation of the box. A nightjar chirred somewhere down by the home field. She stood with her hands on the warm balustrade and let the day run off her, and heard them below. On the gravel walk that ran beneath the terrace, where the laurels made a black wall and 2 people might believe themselves alone. Gabriel's voice low, the room-bred cadence unmistakable, and Honoria's lower still. "Not fair to her, Gabriel. It is not fair to me. You cannot mean to go through with it." "I mean to do what I came to do, for Wiltshire." A small sound, half a laugh, wholly sad. "You always could make duty sound like a virtue when it was only fear. You are afraid of Crispin having it. That is all this is. You would marry a stranger from the far end of Devon to keep your cousin's hands off the river meadows, and call it honour, and break your own heart and hers and mine to do it, a rustle of primrose silk. 10 years, Gabriel. I waited. I am not ashamed to say it to you in the dark, where no one can hear. The old man parted us because he had a whim and a paper, and now the same paper would chain you to a girl who keeps her own account books, because her father cannot, and you will let it, because you have never once in your life done the brave thing instead of the dutiful one." A silence. The nightjar chirred. "Honoria." His voice had gone very quiet. "Do not. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will never speak of it again. Tell me, here, where it costs you nothing to be honest, that there is nothing left. And I will dance at your wedding, and wish you joy of your sensible bride and her tidy step." Another rustle, nearer. "You cannot tell me that. I knew you when you were a boy who climbed to the sea. I know you now. Say the word, and I will go in and let you marry your claws. But you cannot say it, and we both know you cannot, and that is the cruelest thing the old man's paper ever did." Susanna did not wait to hear whether he said it. She drew back from the balustrade, soundless on the warm stone, the blood loud in her own ears, and stood in the dark of the terrace with the stock and the box breathing there, sweetness up at her, and understood 3 things at once, cleanly. The way one understands bad figures in a column that has been wrong all along. He had been brought to Devon by a paper, to a girl he had never seen, to keep his cousin from a fortune. That was the whole of why he was here. Lady Honoria had been parted from him by the same hand that bound him now, and had waited 10 years, and was beautiful, and grave, and right. And she, Susanna Hale, was the clause, the remedy. The sensible bride with the tidy step, who counted sheets and balanced books and would do, who would manage, who would keep a great house running the way she had kept a small one from drowning, a useful wife for a man who needed a wife, and could not have the one he wanted. He had not chosen her. A grandfather's pen had chosen her, to spite a cousin. Gabriel had ridden in on a mule to dress the transaction up as a courtship, to let himself believe the bargain was free, just as Crispin had said, and the only thing Crispin had got wrong was the cruelty of it. Because it was not cruel at all. It was worse than cruel. It was kind. It was a kind man doing a cold thing gently, which left her nothing even to despise. She had let the warm coal sit in her chest. She had let his low, even voice in a linen room teach her how to fold 11 sheets into enough. She had used the bare front of his name at her own table, in front of his mother, and the woman he had loved for 10 years. And all the while she had been a sum he was relieved to find did not embarrass him, and Honoria had been the truth standing a day's drive up the Honiton road, closing. She went in by the far window, so they should not know she had heard. She got through the rest of the evening. She had 3 years of getting through evenings behind her, and they served. She saw her father to his chair, and Lydia to her room, and the candles snuffed, and only when the house had gone dark and breathing did she let herself sit on the edge of her own bed in the heat, her hands open and loose in her lap, with no discipline left in them at all, and name the thing plainly, because she had never in her life been able to manage a trouble she would not name. He had come for Wiltshire. She was the price Wiltshire cost. Lady Honoria was the woman he would have married had a dead hand let him. And that hand had not let him, and so he would marry the clause and be gentle to her forever. And she would spend her life being managed kindly by a man whose heart had climbed to the sea with somebody else 10 years before she ever poured him water in the sun. The nightjar had stopped. The house ticked and cooled. Susanna sat with the bare truth of it and did not weep. Because weeping was for women who could afford the time, and she had a duchess to feed in the morning. She had thought that the bottom of it. She was wrong. There was a step further down, and Crispin Vane was waiting on it for her at dawn. She came down at 5:30 to start the fires herself, as she did every morning, before the one tired girl who was all the kitchen help Wicklow could now command should rise, and she found him already in the cool grey hall, dressed, immaculate, fed by no hand she could imagine, sitting on the settle by the cold hearth with a paper across his knee and the keys of his own, composure perfectly in hand. "Miss Hale," he did not rise. "You keep farmer's hours. I had hoped you would. We shall not be overheard, and what I have to say is better unheard. I have fires to light, Mr. Vane. You have a future to secure, which is a larger fire and badly wants tending." He tapped the folded paper. "I went to some trouble last night, while my cousin walked in the garden with the lady he ought to have married. I have here a draft on my own banker. It clears your father's debts. All of them, Miss Hale. I had the figure from the same source the whole county has it from, and it is uglier than you let your face confess, and it settles upon you, separately, a sum that would keep you and your sister in modest independence for the rest of your natural lives. It asks one thing." He held it out across the cold grate. "Refuse him. Today, before my aunt can be charmed and the parish can be appeased, and the thing gathers a weight no one can lift. Send Gabriel home to Wiltshire and to Honoria, where the dullest soul in England can see he belongs, and take this and be free." The hall was very still. The grey light lay flat on the worn carpet, on the brown lavender she had not had heart to throw out, on the fine pale hand holding the paper that would unmake every figure in her ledger at a stroke. You would beggar yourself, she said, to keep your cousin from his own inheritance. I would spend 10,000 to gain 40, said Crispin Vane pleasantly. It is not generosity, Miss Hale. I have not insulted you with that. You would have seen through it. It is arithmetic. You, of all people, respect arithmetic. His pale eyes did not waver. I am offering you the thing you said in the stable-yard you wanted most, not to be a clause. Take my money, and you are no man's remedy. Refuse it, and marry him, and you will spend your life knowing what you heard from the terrace last night. Yes, I saw you at the balustrade, Miss Hale. I see most things. You will spend it watching him be kind to you across a great many tables, and being grateful, and the gratitude will rot you faster than any want ever did. I have watched it rot women before. Do not be one of them. Take the paper. She looked at the draft. She thought of her father's hands shaking over the rent book. She thought of Lydia, who had nothing, who would have nothing, married off in a turned gown to whoever would have a portionless girl from a laughed-at house. She thought of 11 sheets and a roof that wanted the leads stripped and recast, and 3 years of holding the water out with her 2 Hudsons. Everything she had bled for, here, dry in a fine man's fine hand for 1 word, and she thought, he came for Wiltshire, and I am the price, and the woman he wants is asleep upstairs in my best down. Her hand went out toward the paper. She watched it go as though it belonged to someone else. Watched the ink-stained, competent fingers reach across the cold grate toward the thing that would free them all, and cost only the warm coal she should never have let burn in the first place. Susanna. The Duke stood in the doorway from the back passage, in his shirt-sleeves still, a fire-iron in his hand, from some errand of his own at the kitchen hearth, and his road-dark face in the grey light was the face of a man who has come into a room 1 moment too late and seen exactly how late he is. His grey eyes went to the paper, and to his cousin, and to her outstretched hand, and Susanna saw him understand the whole of it in a breath. The draft, the dawn, the terrace, the word he was about to lose. Do not, he said low, sign anything of Crispin's, Miss Hale, until you have heard. Heard what? Her hand had stopped. It hung in the cold air between the 3 of them, over the dead grate, and she turned it palm up toward him, empty, and her voice came steadier than her whole body felt. That you came for Wiltshire, I have heard it. That a paper bound you to a girl you never saw to spite the man holding that other paper this minute. I have heard that too, from your own mouth in this room yesterday, that the woman asleep upstairs waited 10 years for you, and is right that you have never once done. Brave thing instead of the dutiful one I heard. That, Your Grace, from the terrace, last night, where it cost you nothing to be honest, and where you could not say to her that there was nothing left. Her hand did not tremble, she was distantly amazed at it. So tell me what is left to hear. Tell me quickly. Your cousin's banker is waiting, and my father's debts are not. And I find I am very tired of being the sum that everyone in this house keeps adding up to suit themselves. The fire-iron lowered in his hand. Crispin Vane sat back against the settle and folded the draft once, unhurried, content, a man who has played a card and need not even watch it land. And the Duke of Ashforth looked at her across the cold grate in the grey beginning of the day, with the truth of every word she had flung at him, standing plain and unanswered in his face, and opened his mouth to say the thing that might keep her. And from the stair behind them came the small, dry, carrying voice of his mother, who had risen with the light and seen, from the turn of the steps, the whole tableau below. "Well," said the Dowager Duchess into the silence, "I see we are all of us up early. How fortunate. I had something to say to Miss Hale, and I had rather say it now, before my son ruins it, as he ruins most things by speaking first." The Dowager came down the last of the stairs the way water finds a level, without hurry and without doubt, one small gloved hand on the rail and her thundercloud travelling silk, whispering over the worn treads. She had dressed already. She had dressed, Susanna thought, before the light, which meant she had lain awake with her own arithmetic, the same as everyone else under this roof. She crossed the grey hall, put out 2 fingers, and drew the folded draft clean out of her nephew's hand before he had decided whether to let it go. "Aunt," said Crispin Vane. "Be quiet, Crispin. You have talked since Tuesday, and accomplished a great deal of damage with it, and I am too old to listen to a clever boy a moment longer than I must." She turned the paper over, read the banker's name on its face, and made a small sound through her nose that managed to contain an entire opinion. 10,000. To unmake a marriage. You always did spend freely on the things you hated, and not a farthing on the things you wanted. It is your one consistency. She held the draft out to the cold grate over the dead ash and let it fall. It lay there pale on the grey. "There. Now we may talk like Christians, with nothing for sale on the table." "You have no idea," Crispin began, rising. "What that paper?" "I have every idea. I had it from Marsh, who writes to me as well as to you, you foolish creature, and rather more legibly." The dowager turned her back on him entire, which was its own kind of blow, and faced Susanna across the hearth. The grey light lay flat on her 60 governed years. "Miss Hale, you were about to take my nephew's money and send my son home. I should like 5 minutes before you do, and then you may take it after all, if you still wish, and I shall not hinder you. I am too tired to hinder a sensible woman. They never thank you for it." Susanna's hand had come back to her side. She felt the cold of the grate still on her palm. "Say it then, ma'am. I have fires to light, and I find I would rather hear an old truth than light them in the dark." Good. Something flickered behind the duellist's eyes. That sharp old interest again, the button off the foil. "Then hear it. My son told you the betrothal was made in your cradle, to a girl he had never seen. To spite the boy presently glaring at my back. That is what Crispin believes, because Crispin believes the world is arithmetic, and within his lights he is not wrong, only small." She drew a slow breath. "It is not what happened. The clock she could not afford to mend ticked its uneven time. Out in the yard a horse blew." Susanna stood very still. "My husband's father," the dowager said, "came to Devon 11 years ago. Quietly. He told no one, which was unusual in him, for he was a man fond of an audience. He had heard there was a Hale girl, granddaughter of a woman he had once. The smallest hesitation, a hairline crack in the governed face, a woman he had once admired, before duty took them each their separate roads, as duty does. He came to see what had become of her line. He sat in an inn at Honiton and watched a child of 14 drive a cart of marketing through the square, because her father's man had taken ill, and haggle a corn factor, down a shilling, and give the shilling to a beggar at the church porch on her way out of the town." The dowager's chin lifted. "He came home and wrote a codicil that night. Not to spite Crispin. He had forgotten Crispin existed. He wrote it because he had spent his whole life among beautiful, useless women, and one merely useful one, and he had just seen, in a market square, the thing he had given up, grown into a girl who did not yet know her own worth. He bound Gabriel to you, Miss Hale, because he could not have you for himself, and would not see the chance pass twice out of the family for want of a paper to hold it." Susanna found she had put her hand to the mantle. The wood was cool and real under her fingers. "He saw me drive a cart. He saw you give away the shilling," the dowager said. "That was the part he could not get over. He told me of it the week before she stopped and chose the gentler road, the week before we lost him. An old man weeping over a child, and a beggar, and a corn factor. I thought him in his dotage. I begin this morning to think he saw further than I did." Her glass came up, and for the first time it was not a weapon. It was an old woman looking honestly at a young one through the one lens she trusted. "You are not a clause, Miss Hale. You are the whole of why the paper exists. Everything else is the noise that has gathered round it." Behind her, Crispin Vane laughed softly, and the rotten thing at the core of his fine face came up into the light and stayed there. "How affecting," he said. "How very nearly true. Aunt, you have always had a gift for the half that flatters us. Shall I supply the other half, or will you?" He stepped round the settle, unhurried, immaculate in the grey dawn, and the keys of his composure were perfectly in hand. "Grandfather wrote his codicil. Granted. A sentimental old man and a market square and a shilling. I do not dispute a word of it. But sentiment is not law, and I have read the law, every clause, 3 times, which is twice more than Gabriel has had the stomach for. So, let me tell Miss Hale the part you both keep folding under the cloth." He turned his pale, clear eyes on Susanna, and they were almost kind, which was the worst of him. "Whose hand holds your father's debts?" The hall went quiet in a new way. "You said yourself," Susanna answered slowly. "The whole county holds them. Tradesmen. The bank at Exeter. The county held them. Past tense, Miss Hale. You of all people will mark a tense." Crispin's smile widened by a careful degree. "I bought them. All of them. The bank, the corn merchant, the man who recast your leads 4 winters ago and was never paid. I sent my own man through Devon in the spring buying paper the way other men buy. Hunters, and now every farthing your father owes, he owes to me. I have carried this house in my coat pocket since April." He spread his fine hands. "That is why I could offer to clear them as a wedding present for a wedding that does not happen. They are mine to forgive. They are also mine to call. I had rather forgive them, naturally. But a man likes to know his terms are understood on both sides before he is generous." Mr. Hale's voice came from the passage doorway, thin and grey, where he had come down at last in his good coat, having dressed in dread the same as all of them. "You hold my notes." "Everyone, sir. I am sorry you must learn it standing." Crispin inclined his head with a courtesy more wounding than any sneer. "But you see now why your daughter should take the money and the freedom both, and let my cousin go home to the lady who suits him. Refuse him, Miss Hale, and your father's slate is wiped, and you are independent, and I have what I want. Marry him out of this pretty new tale of shillings and market squares, and—" The pause was exquisite. "Well, I should have no further reason to be patient, and patience is the only thing standing between your father and the assizes for debt. I do dislike to put it so boldly. You have forced me to it by being clever. Clever women always cost more to manage. The fire iron came up in Gabriel's hand, not raised to strike, only gripped, the knuckles paling along the black metal. And his road-dark face had gone to something Susanna had not seen on it before, not the governed weariness, not the careful rationing, but a plain white anger held on a very short chain. "You bought a man's ruin," he said, low, "and carried it about in your pocket for half a year, to use against a girl who poured you water she could not spare. Get out of this house, Crispin. It is not your house, Cos." Crispin did not move. "By every clause I have read 3 times, on present evidence, it is rather nearer to being mine." "Then I will buy it from you," Gabriel said. "With Wiltshire? You cannot. The Wiltshire that would buy a county of small debts is precisely the Wiltshire you forfeit the instant Miss Hale refuses you. Which, as I have just made tolerably plain, she is about to do, since the alternative is her father in a sponging house." Crispin retrieved the fallen draught from the cold grate, shook the ash from it, and laid it flat on the settle where Susanna could reach it, the banker's name uppermost. "There it is again. I will not insult you by snatching it back. Take it, Miss Hale. Be free of all of us. It is, I promise you, the only door in this house that opens outward." Susanna looked at the paper on the worn settle. She looked at her father, grey in his good coat, holding the doorframe the way a man holds a mast. She looked at the dowager, who had said her piece and now stood aside, watching with her duellist's stillness, declining to hinder a sensible woman. and she looked last and longest at Gabriel, with the fire iron forgotten in his white-knuckled hand, and the whole truth of how he had come, and why, and what it would cost him to stay, standing naked in his grey eyes. "You have all of you," she said, "spent 3 days telling me what I am, the clause, the remedy, the sensible bride with the tidy step, the present inconvenience, the shilling a sentimental old man could not get over." Her voice came level as a ruled line. She was distantly amazed at it, with her heart going like a hair in her chest. "I am obliged for the variety, but I find I will choose my own name this morning, and not take one of yours second-hand." She turned to Gabriel. "You wished a moment ago to say a thing that might keep me. Your cousin interrupted you, and then your mother, and then your cousin again. Say it now. With your mother by, and your cousin by, and my father by, and the whole of it on the table with nothing for sale. Say it plainly, your grace, or do not, but do not let another soul in this room say it for you." The hall held its breath. A bird had begun in the garden, one thin thread of song through the cracked sash, and the grey light was warming, very slightly, toward gold along the eastern wall. Gabriel set the fire iron down against the cold hearth. He crossed the worn carpet to her, past the draught on the settle, past his cousin, past the ash, and he stopped the careful arm's length away that he had kept since the stable-yard, the old rationing of his nearness, and then, for the first time, he closed even that. "I came for Wiltshire," he said. "I will not unsay it. You would not believe me, and you would be right. A paper brought me to Devon. Fear of that man brought me. Vanity dressed it as a courtship and put me on a mule, so I might tell myself the bargain was free. Every cold word you have flung at me since yesterday is just, and I have stood here and earned each one." He drew a breath, and the room-bred cadence of him cracked clean down its middle. "And then I poured the bargain out in a stable-yard, and watched you bring oats to a beast at a house that had 11 sheets, and no down to spare, and tell me that grooming, a tired animal, was the one honest thing in your day too. And I understood that I had ridden 40 miles to lose an argument I did not know I was having. I do not want Wiltshire, Susanna. I want the woman who would let her house come down stone by stone before she would be married as a remedy. If keeping you costs me Wiltshire to the last river meadow, then Crispin may have it, and welcome, and I will learn to do without 40,000 a year the way you have learned to do without 40 pounds. Badly at first, and then on purpose." "You cannot mean that," said Crispin. And for the first time the pale composure had a thread out of true in it. "Gabriel, the estate, the name, you would hand it to me for a Devon's parson's. I would hand it to you for nothing at all, if it were the price of her looking at me the way she looked at everyone else on that drive who was not laughing." Gabriel had not turned from Susanna. "There. That is the thing I wished to say and could not say to Honoria on the terrace, because it was never Honoria's to be told. I love you. I have no right to it, and no fortune to dress it in, by tomorrow noon perhaps no roof of my own to offer it under. And I love you, Susanna Hale, freely, which is the one thing in my whole bound life no dead man's paper arranged for me. Refuse me if you must, but refuse a man who has just laid Wiltshire on your settle next to my cousin's 10,000, and chosen you over both." The bird sang on. The gold had reached the worn carpet now, a long warm bar of it across the floor between them, and Susanna stood in the edge of it, with the cold of the grate gone from her palm, and the warm swallowed coal in her chest flaring up at last into something she had no further strength and no further wish to set down. She heard a step on the stair. Honoria had come down, primrose silk again, her dark hair loose for the early hour, her lovely grave face taking in the hall, the ash, the draught, the gold light, the two of them standing in it, the arm's length that was no longer an arm's length at all. And to her great and lasting credit, the woman who had waited 10 years looked at the man she had waited for, and at the girl he had chosen, and let out a long breath that had something in it, almost of relief. "I heard from the landing," Honoria said. "I will not pretend I did not." She came the rest of the way down, and her cool, brief clasp found Susanna's wrist, and held it a moment. I told him on the terrace that he had never once done the brave thing instead of the dutiful one. "I believe I have just been answered." Her eyes, when they lifted to Gabriel, were bright and steady and finished. "It was a true summer, Gabriel, that summer at the sea. I do not regret an hour of it, and I have spent rather too many of the years since polishing it past what it was. You owe me nothing. You never did. My father broke it for a richer offer that he afterward lost at cards, and I let myself blame your grandfather, because it was kinder to my pride than blaming my own house." She stepped back. "Be happy. Both of you. It is a great deal more interesting than being right, and I have lately had my fill of being right." "Honoria," Gabriel's voice was rough. "You came all this way too." "I came," she said, "because Crispin wrote to me that there was a fortune in play and a foolish cousin in need of rescue from a designing country miss, and I let myself be flattered into the carriage. I am not proud of it, but I have eyes, and I have used them at this poor lovely house for a day, and the designing country miss has been awake since 5:30 lighting fires for the people come to unseat her." Her chin came up, and the kindness in her was real and unrotted and entirely her own. "I will not be the lady in the primrose silk that the parish whispers of. I would rather be the one who told the truth in a grey hall and went home, Aunt." She turned to the dowager. "Will you lend me your carriage as far as Honiton? I find I have no further reason to keep west, and a very great one to go east before I lose my nerve and stay to watch them be insufferably content." "You may have the carriage," said the dowager, "and my good opinion, which I bestow on perhaps 4 persons living and have just this morning added a 5th. Go home, Honoria. You have behaved beautifully, which I did not expect of you, and I shall say so to anyone who asks, which they will." And Crispin Vane, abandoned in the warming light by every ally he had brought into the room, made one last cast, because men like Crispin always have one last card and cannot help but show it. "Charming," he said, "truly. And in the meantime your father, Miss Hale, still owes me £1,100. And a marriage that beggars my cousin does nothing whatever to mend it. You may have your love match in the gold light. You will have it in a sponging house by Michaelmas. I hold the paper. I will always hold the paper." He bent unhurried and lifted his draft from the settle, folding it once. "My offer stands until I leave this hall and not one moment after. Independence and your father free. Or this, and ruin dressed in a poem about a shilling." "No," said the Dowager Duchess. "You will not hold the paper, Crispin. You will surrender it. Here, now, on this table." She crossed to the little walnut desk where the ledger lay closed, set down her glass, and drew from her own reticule a folded document of her own, heavy, sealed in black wax, and laid it flat on the wood where Susanna could reach it. "I am an old woman with a jointure I have spent 60 years declining to touch, because my husband's people taught me that a duchess does not soil her hands with money, and I was fool enough at 20 to believe them. I have touched it this week. Marsh has had his instructions since Tuesday, the day you bought your last note in Exeter, and were careless enough to be seen doing it by a clerk who owes his place to me. That paper redeems every debt your nephew holds against the House of Hale, at the full face of it, payable on my signature, which is upon it." She tapped the black seal with one gloved finger. "Read the line, Miss Hale. The clever ones always want the line." Susanna took up the heavy document. The wax was cold and faintly oily under her thumb. She broke it and unfolded the stiff paper, and the secretary's copperplate ran clear across the top of it. "To the redemption in full of all debts, notes, and obligations of Mr. Gerald Hale of Wicklow, the same being assigned this day from Mr. Crispin Vane to the Dowager Duchess of Ashforth, and by her forgiven outright and forever. The ink had a faint shine to it still. Her own breath stirred the edge of the page. You, Crispin's voice, had lost its silk entire. You cannot have. The assignment requires my hand. I have not signed. You will sign, the Dowager said, because the alternative is that I write this morning to every house in Wiltshire and Devon, both over my own name, the entire history of a man who bought a sick old neighbour's debts in secret to extort a marriage from his cousin. And I will tell it, Crispin, with all the shillings and market squares left out, and only the sponging house left in, and you will not be received at a christening in either county before you are 40. You have spent your life trading on the family's good name. I am the family's good name. Sign the assignment, take yourself to your carriage, and go and be clever somewhere I do not have to watch you do it. The hall was utterly still. The bird had stopped. The bar of gold had climbed the wall to the browning lavender and lit it so that for a moment the dead flowers looked almost alive. Crispin Vane looked at his aunt, and at the document in Susanna's ink-stained hands, and at the 2 cousins' worth of fortune sliding away from him in a single morning, and the rotten core of his beauty showed once more, and then, slowly, closed over into something nearer to a boy's plain sulk. He crossed to the desk. He took the pens Susanna did not offer, and he found for himself in the standish, and he signed a quick, vicious slash of ink, and he straightened his immaculate cuffs. I hope she keeps your books, Cos, he said. As well as she has just kept mine. You will need it. 40,000 a year is a great deal to manage, and you have always managed nothing but your conscience. He bowed to no one and to all of them, and went out into the brightening yard. And they heard him call for his horses, in a voice that for once had no audience left to play to. It was Mr. Hale who broke at last, not into anything loud, only a long shudder that went through his thin frame as he stood in the doorway, and his hand came up over his face. Forgiven, he said into his palm, outright. After 3 years of. He could not finish it. Susanna crossed the gold light, and put her arms around her father, in front of the Duke and the Dowager, and the cool, lovely shade of the woman, gathering her gloves to go, and held him while the long year ran out of him at the eyes, and felt, over his shaking shoulder, Gabriel watching her with an expression she could now at last afford to read. Papa. She drew back, and wiped his face with her own thumb, the way she had wiped Lydia's 100 times, the elder of the house to the last. Go and tell Lydia. She has been frightened since Tuesday, and deserves to be the first told it is over. Go on, he went, an old man with a light step, the way he had gone to see to Crispin's glass 2 mornings before. Glad past speech of the errand, and the Dowager took up her own glass from the desk, and her gloves, and inclined her head to Honoria, and the 2 great ladies withdrew toward the breakfast. The one tired kitchen girl had somehow contrived, leaving the morning room to the people it had always, since the first hour, been built for. 2, and no more. The gold had filled it now. It lay on the closed ledger, on the broken black wax, on the worn carpet, on the man in his shirt-sleeves, with the road still dark on his jaw, who had laid Wiltshire on a settle an hour ago, and stood now with nothing in his hands at all. You have your fortune back, Susanna said. Your mother has seen to it. You need not marry the clause after all, your grace. The codicil stands as it always stood. Marry me, and it is satisfied, and Wiltshire is yours entire. Refuse me, and it falls to your cousin yet, for all that he is gone from the yard. Every figure in the column tells you to marry me, and now my father's debts are gone besides, so I cannot even pretend I bring you a burden to balance the gain. She made herself hold his eyes. So you are free this morning, of every reason that brought you. So I cannot read you this morning, your grace, for every reason that brought you to Devon now points straight at my hand. You may marry me and keep Wiltshire and a quiet conscience and the parish's pardon altogether. And how is any woman to know, in the face of so neat a sum, whether she is wanted or merely reckoned the cheapest way to hold a county. "I know it," he said. "Then why?" she asked, and her voice was not level now, not anything like level. Are you still in my morning room with the dust on you and the whole of Wiltshire still riding on the word?" He closed the gold light between them. He took her ink-stained hand off the desk and into both of his broad ones, carefully, the way he had handed back an empty glass on the first afternoon, as though it had told him something. And this time their fingers touched, and he did not ration it. "Because I am not asking you as a duke," he said. "I asked you that an hour ago, with Wiltshire on the settle, and you were right to be wary of it. A man may give away a county for a grand gesture and want it back by winter. Hear me then, with the arithmetic at its loudest. Yes, marrying you keeps Wiltshire, and yes, every figure tells me to do it. And I would do it still if the codicil ran the other way, and your hand cost me every acre I hold. I proved that an hour ago, before my mother lifted a finger, when I laid the whole of it on that settle sooner than by your word. The figures point at you. They are not why I am standing here. There is nothing left in this room but a man who came up your drive on a mule and one woman in Devon who poured him water before she knew he could pay for it." His thumb moved over her knuckles, over the ink. "Marry me for none of it, Susanna. Not the fortune that is restored, nor the debts that are gone, nor the paper that is spent. Marry me because I am, on the whole, sounder than I look. Mab would vouch for me, if you asked her, and because I should spend a great while learning how you fold. 11 sheets into enough, and because I find I cannot, having seen it, do without the way you go toward the trouble in a house instead of away from. I love you. I have said it now with nothing on the table, which is the only way it was ever worth saying." The cut hay sweetness had begun to come up through the cracked sash on the warming air, the home field stirring under the new sun, and somewhere a lark had got up over the white gold sky, needling it the way the larks had needled it on the first afternoon when the whole drive laughed and one woman held her tongue. "There is a great deal wrong with you," Susanna said unsteadily. "Your coat is a disgrace. You weighed my family on a scale by candlelight. You let my father shake at his own table. You arrive at houses on a beast a miller would be ashamed of, and you frighten old men with the word Duke, and then will not behave like one, and you have a cousin I shall be civil to at funerals, and not a day besides. All true, the almost smile, there and staying now. Is there a but somewhere in the column, or is it loss carried all the way down? But, she said, and her own laugh broke out of her, wet and astonished, and entirely beyond her discipline to govern. I find that the one soul who did not laugh on that drive has somehow got herself laughed clean off her good sense by a man on a mule, and I have not the smallest idea how to balance it, except to say yes, and stop trying to make 11 into 14, and let it be enough. She turned her ink-stained hand over in his and closed her fingers round his broad ones. Yes, Gabriel, freely, for the mule and the shilling and none of the 40,000. Yes. He bent his road-dark head and kissed her then, once in the bar of gold light, with the broken seal and the closed ledger and the spent paper of every reason behind them. And it was brief and careful and certain, the kiss of a man who had rationed himself a long while and meant never to do it again, and Susanna's free hand came up and rested against the strained seam of his disgraceful coat, over the steady hammer of him, and the lavender browning in the vases, and the cut hay through the window, and the warm wood of the mantel, and the chalk of the dried lavender on her own wrists all ran together into one summer morning she would, she knew already, be unfolding in her memory like a kept sheet for the whole of her life. They were married at Wicklow in the last week of August, when the heat had broken into the long gold of a Devon harvest, and the home field stood in stooks past the churchyard wall. The Cardews came and laughed at nothing whatever, and Mrs. Cardew told 4 separate people that she had said from the first there was more there than a mule. Lydia, in a gown that was new and not turned, wept becomingly and danced with a curate and forgot, for whole half-hours together, to be ashamed of anything. The dowager wore thundercloud silk and gave her good opinion to a 6th person, the curate, on the grounds that any man who could make Lydia Hale sit still through a sermon had a future. Honoria sent, from Wiltshire, a letter in a fine hand, and a christening cup of old silver, got in before there was a christening, with a note that said only, "For the way you go toward the trouble, H." And Susanna kept the note in the writing box, and the cup on the morning-room mantel, where the gold light found it of an afternoon. Mr. Hale gave his daughter away with a steady hand and walked home from the church on his own legs through his own redeemed fields, and was heard to remark to the corn factor that his son-in-law, whatever the parish had thought on a certain hot afternoon in July, had turned out a sound man, and that one ought never to judge a fellow by his horse. And on a blue evening in September, with the Swifts gone south, and the first wood smoke standing thin over the stable-yard, Susanna walked down to the sea at last, the 8 miles done in a battered gig behind a grey mule, who had a low opinion of carriages and shared it, freely the whole way, and stood on the shingle in the cooling wind, with her husband's coat round her shoulders, the good new coat now, though the old, disgraceful one hung still in the Wicklow tack-room, where Bramble could not be persuaded to let it go. "You used to say you would take her to the sea," Susanna said. The waves came in and drew out, hissing over the stones, and the salt was on her lips, and Mab cropped the thin grass above the tide-line, with the gig shafts tipped to the sand. "I did." Gabriel stood close at her shoulder, no rationing left in him at all. "I find I am glad on the whole to have waited and brought the right one. It is a better tale. A man tires of being the one nobody laughs at, you know. It is a great deal pleasanter to be the one a clever woman laughs at on purpose, 8 miles from the sea, with the whole of his fortune restored, and not 1 penny of it the reason she is standing here. That," said Susanna, leaning back into the warmth of him as the light went violet over the water, "was very nearly a joke, your grace." "I have been practicing," said the Duke of Ashforth. "Mab is a hard audience, but she is teaching me." The first star came out over the darkening sea, and the mule lipped the grass, and Susanna Ashforth, who had risen at 4 to wax floors for a man on a mule, and had got, in the end, the only fortune in England she would have crossed a room to keep, turned her face up to her husband's in the last of the summer light, and was kissed and laughed, on purpose, where no one in the world could overhear but the sea. If this story warmed your evening, stay a while by the fire with us. Leave a comment and tell me the moment you knew Susanna had chosen rightly, and subscribe to Adrian's Fireside so the next tale finds you when the candles are lit. Until then, sleep gently, and mind you never judge a gentleman by his horse.